Sorry. I guess you're wearing your Soto Zen robes today?
I'm wearing my samurai today. Yes, that's right. That's right.
Very good. Well, let me just check the time and we will start, and I will more formally and politely introduce you.
No formality is necessary, really.
Fiona, are we ready to go? Very good. Hello and welcome, everyone who is coming to us from many places. I am very glad to see some old faces, a few new ones. I see we have our friends in Europe and in the United States. Hello. Our honored guest today is the Reverend Ayya Dhammadīpā, also known as Konin Cardenas. And the reason is that Ayya Dhammadīpā, I guess I would not say Venerable Ayya Dhammadīpā. That would be redundant, would it not?
That's correct, yes.
Ayya Dhammadīpā walks through life on, I would guess you would say, two paths as one, not two, as a Zen teacher and also as a fully ordained Theravādan nun. Please pardon my glasses. Your resume is very long, and I want to make sure that we touch on it. She took up.
No, don't do that.
Well, briefly, she began Zen practice in 1987. She was ordained by the great Sekkei Harada Roshi, and she also received precepts from Shosan Victoria Austin, from whom I believe, if I make a mistake, please correct me, but you received Dharma transmission later in the Suzuki Roshi lineage. But also, she is a full Theravādan bhikkhuni, having undertaken the 311 precepts in that tradition, and has trained at the Aloka Vihara Forest Monastery. Ayya means venerable, so the title Ayya Dhammadīpā is the usual form of address, and I hope I have that right. But she is also wonderfully Konin Cardenas. I also hope that she will speak today about how she walks those two paths. But I just want to say thank you for being here. You're coming to us from London today.
Yes. Thank you.
And say again, if you would, what are you studying in London right now?
I'm studying Buddhist art history and the preservation of Buddhist heritage. I'm doing a one-year program at the Courtauld Institute of Art, which is one of the departments of University of London, and a beautiful art history school in its own right, associated with Somerset House. If folks who've been to London, Somerset House and the Courtauld is a place actually mostly better known for Impressionist art. But they have a long relationship with the Dongwang Academy and the Robert Ho Foundation, and so they offer this one-year program, and specifically with the Buddhist focus.
That's fascinating. Will you eventually be actually working in Buddhist art restoration in Asia or somewhere else?
Well, I think that's unlikely. I think my community will be very, very happy to have me back full time and doing what I'm doing there. But I do expect that I'll be doing some teaching around these topics, more teaching around these topics, and some more travel, and we'll see about whether there's any sort of actual hands-on conservation in my future. I think I would enjoy that, but I don't see myself taking a secular job ever again in this lifetime.
You're a Renaissance bhikkhuni, Dhammadīpā. You have many talents. Thank you.
Yes, I enjoy the breadth of the Dhamma and the breadth of the Sangha. So yes.
Well, if we may, it's our custom just to sit for a minute or two of where you are Zazen. If I may ring the bell and just make yourself comfortable where you're sitting, and then I will turn everything over to you for a talk. I'll just ring the bell.
Okay.
And now, if I may, I turn everything over to Reverend Cardenas, Aya Dhammadīpā. Thank you again. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you, Jundo-san. And yeah, so as was mentioned, I was contacted to say something about the chapter that I wrote for Zen Teachings in Challenging Times. And I really appreciate that teaching because it gives us a taste of some Zen history as well as some present moment Dhamma or Dharma. I have to pardon my bouncing back and forth between Pali and Sanskrit. I will endeavor to at least give both. So the basis of the story is about the sixth Zen ancestor. Sixth Zen ancestor is Daikan Eno in Japanese, and he's better known, I would say, by most people as Wei Neng. That's his Chinese name, Dajan Wei Neng. My Chinese pronunciation not quite as good as my Japanese pronunciation, but nonetheless, that's about it. And he was from late 7th century China. I think it's not a stretch to say that he is probably the most revered of all the Chan ancestors, the sixth ancestor. That's why there is a sutra, a text called the Platform Sutra, which is somewhat autobiographical and somewhat written by his students. And prior to that point, anything that was called a sutta or a sutra was understood to have been the words of a Buddha. But he didn't make that claim. And nonetheless, he has been given that honor. And the story is about something about the way that he became the ancestor, the sixth ancestor in the lineage. And so Hongren, Daimon Hongren, or Daimon Konin in Japanese, Hongren in Chinese, was the fifth ancestor. And the fifth ancestor decided it was time for the succession to happen. And so what did he do? He said, we're going to have a poetry slam. Now think about this. This is one of the most prestigious monasteries in China, a very large monastery, many hundreds of monastics, and very, I would say, well known by the lay practitioner community as well. And that's how we decide the succession, is by a poetry contest. And so as the story goes, I won't go too much into that piece of it, but as the story goes, Wei Nang wrote a poem that directly pointed to emptiness and really refuting a form, an idea of practice as merely based in self-improvement. So given that, in the middle of the night, he is called to Hongren's chambers, and Hongren gives him the robe and the bowl that represent the succession to the abbacy. But he knows, Hongren, the fifth ancestor, the current abbot, knows that people are going to be upset about this. So he tells Wei Nang, go for a walk. Go for a really long walk. Go for a walk for about, 3 years or so. Because even in China, this is an unusual way to pass on the succession. So in fact, Wei Nang sets out with the robe and the bowl. And in fact, many of his Dharma brothers were upset. A couple hundred or so, it is said, set out in search of him after hearing that he'd left, that he'd taken the robe and the bowl from Hongren and been named the successor. So now a couple of things could happen here. One thing that could happen is you could feel mudita. You could hear that your Dharma brother, who worked in the kitchen and was not even actually ordained as a monk at this point, but had been given some pretty heavy physical labor in the kitchen for a while, and had been sort of at the fringes of the monastery, so to speak. You could hear that your Dharma brother has received this wonderful accolade, and you could feel mudita, you could feel empathetic joy. Wow, what a great thing for him. Amazing. Yeah, this is one of the 4 Brahma Viharas, the 4 heavenly dwellings that were described in early Buddhism. And that are some of the key practices of early Buddhism, both meditatively and contemplatively. And you could do that, but it would have to, that we would say empathetic joy is really best used for situations in which the other person is experiencing a joy for a skillful reason. So we wouldn't want to have empathetic joy, for example, if somebody robbed a bank or if somebody had committed some terrible crime. That's inappropriate, right? That wouldn't make sense. And that's a bit of what was happening here, right? The Dharma brothers are not sure, actually, that the right transmission has occurred. Maybe there was some funny business. Maybe there was something unethical that happened. They're not sure. Or it could be that they're feeling some degree of envy. That was a little bit about what I wrote in the article in the chapter there in the book. Perhaps they're feeling some envy, like, hey, it shouldn't happen to that bloke. He hasn't earned it. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He just got lucky. Just got lucky and wrote 3 nice lines of poetry. And what's up with that, right? I'm feeling some envy. Some envy that it should have gone to the head monk, or it should have gone to this person or that person. And envy is a very difficult, is a painful form of suffering, a kind of basically setting your heart in opposition to what has already happened, saying that it shouldn't be as it is. But it is as it is. For whatever reason, the causes and conditions arose such that that was the outcome. That is the present moment result. So setting your heart against that is going to tend to lead to some dukkha, some suffering, right? For this reason, we have a teaching from Shantideva. So Shantideva was a bit after our protagonists here, or after Huineng. In the 8th century, Shantideva was an Indian monk and scholar. And Shantideva said, well, if you can do something about your problem, then why be upset? Why be distressed? And if you can't do something about your problem, then why be distressed? Right? If you can do something about it, then set out doing that thing. And don't create a bunch of unnecessary suffering. But if you can't, if the thing is a done deal, then also, why create unnecessary suffering by being opposed to it? So this is one approach, but it wasn't the approach that these folks took, because they did in fact set out to find Huineng. And not surprisingly, the first person that finds Huineng is his Dharma brother Huiming. And we're not surprised by that, because Huiming had been in the military before becoming a monk. He was a veteran of the Chinese army. So he knew how to track people down. And so he tracks down Huineng in the mountains. And Huineng sees him coming, and he sets down the bowl and the robe, and he says, this is a thing of faith, the robe in particular. This robe represents faith. So how would it be appropriate to fight over this thing? You can just have it. You can just have it. So right away, he's giving a really impressive teaching to his Dharma brother Huiming. He knows that it's not the robe that makes him the successor. The robe is the accessory, right? And why does he know that? He knows that because in his life, he has been a very poor person who had no status, who had no nice clothes. He was also not ordained as a monk at that point, so he didn't even have that status. And yet he knew that it was his wisdom and his understanding of himself as a dharma, as a complete dharma, that was what makes him the ancestor, the successor. He had the confidence in that part. So as the koan goes in the Gateless Gate, or as Thomas Cleary likes to translate it in No Barrier, the koan collection, as the koan goes, it says, in fear, he says, Huiming, the Dharma brother, says to Huineng, oh, I've come for the teaching. It actually says he can't pick up the robe. So now we don't know if we take this literally as some kind of miracle, or if we take this figuratively. Either way, he doesn't attempt to take the robe. He changes his position very suddenly. He realizes that he's feeling fearful, and he changes his position and he says, I'm here for the teaching. Please give me a teaching. So now here we give him some credit, right? We say, oh, That's a very wise thing to do. Number one, the quality of observation, that he notices that he's feeling that something's wrong with what he's doing, with what his place in this relationship or this dialogue suddenly. Yes. Maybe he realizes in that moment, wow, even if I took the robe, that's breaking the precept of taking what's not given. Because even though Wei Neng is willing to give it to me, our teacher, Hongren, didn't give it to me. So actually that would be breaking the precept. Maybe he realizes that this robe and this bowl that Wei Neng has is about trust. That's what they represent. They represent their teacher, Hongren, demonstrating his trust in Wei Neng's understanding. In fact, in a way, you could say that any robe or any bowl is doing exactly that. This raksu, no matter what color it is, it's a trust between teacher and student, and between that teacher's teacher and that teacher's teacher, and so on, back through the lineage. So here we have Wei Ming having some degree of wisdom, enough wisdom to ask for a teaching. Now there might still be, I would suggest, a little grain of envy in here as well, right? Like, prove to me that you're the guy, right? Give me a teaching. So Hongren gives him a teaching, this famous koan. Not thinking good, not thinking bad, right in this moment, what is your original face? So now welcome to the world of koans, where the teaching is not an answer, but a question. So what does this word koan mean? Maybe y'all know some of this, but just to share. So koan is a contraction of kofu no antoku. Kofu no antoku means, it means a type of proclamation, a legal statement that would have been pinned on a board in the town square in ancient China. It's a literal statement of a law, a new law, or some kind of rule. So it has the connotation of something that applies to everyone, something which is universal. I often think of it in terms of this English word. I think of it in terms of precedent. A koan is like a precedent. It's not our case. It's a slightly different case, but it's a case that relates to our case. It's a case that can tell us something about our case. So what is this? What is this teaching that Wei Neng has given? There's 3 parts to it. And I want to say that about koans. If you don't see 3 meanings in a koan, you haven't penetrated it yet. So there are at least 3 pieces to this particular response that Wei Ming receives from Wei Neng. So the first part is not thinking good, not thinking bad. So what is that? That is, set aside your discriminating mind. Right? Step into that place where you understand the harmony of all things, the harmony of all causes and conditions as they are right here, right now. That's the second pointer. Right here, right now. Not something you learned in a book last year. Not something that somebody buried on a mountain 1,000 years ago. Not some form of bowing that somebody taught you 30 years ago. No. Right here, right now, the complete Dharma is present. It couldn't possibly be any other way because the Dharma is reality. It is the reality in which we live. You are fully an expression of Dharma because you live in reality. You are fully embedded in the reality that the Dharma is describing. So that's our second part, right here, right now. We got the first part, setting aside the discriminating good and bad. And then the third part, the hardest part. What is your original face? So now here, it's one of those cases where it can be helpful to sort of put it in a little bit more colloquial language, something that is not so related to the culture of that time, the way of speaking of that time. Because the way of speaking of that time would explain it as your face before your parents were born. What is your face before your parents were born? And that might not give us any more help with the question. So the way to think about this, I want to suggest, is that it's asking you, what are you? What is this thing, this 5 aggregates, without any of your identity from this lifetime? Before your parents were born, what was this thing? So in any event, Wei Ming receives the teaching and he says, oh, great, that's great. Is there any secret meaning to this that you've just taught me? And thereby demonstrates the fact that he didn't get it. Because he's still looking to receive something special from outside, right? First, he was looking to receive the robe that would make him special. Now he's looking for some secret teaching that will make him special. But it isn't like that, right? There's no, sorry folks, but there is no special ring. That's not how it works. Nor is there any particular word or phrase. You know, we talk about the turning word, but that means that something happened in you, not outside. When there was a turning word. So Wei Nung immediately corrects him and says, what I just taught you is not esoteric, it's not secret. If you turn inward and reflect, you will see that it is here. So we hear perhaps echoes of this in Dogen's, right? Take the backward step and turn the light inward. So don't look out there. Don't wait for somebody to give you the special decoder ring. Don't be worried about whether that person has it or not. But know this thing, this very body and mind. as the thing you're looking for. And when you do that, then I believe that you will find that the path is very, very demanding. The path will ask you to have the courage to show up for whatever is really true in your life. I'm not in the habit of talking about myself. That happens to be, I think, harder than any koan. But nonetheless, I will say that is how I have come to be ordained in two traditions. Because those were the teachings, these are the teachings, all of them, both of them, that meet what I have seen, what I know to be true about this set of 5 aggregates, about this thing. So just like Wei Ming, you can ask yourself if you're ready to really receive the teaching that is already here. And in the end, in the koan, what he says, what Wei Ming says to Wei Nang is, oh, now I know hot and cold for myself. A very colloquial, a very old Zen way of saying, I know my own experience. I see that this points right here at this thing, this Dhamma. I think that's what I wanted to share for this evening. Thank you all for your kind attention. Happy to offer some responses to any kinds of questions or reflections that you might have.
I want to thank you profoundly, Ayya Dhammadīpā. I just want to say that it was a beautiful talk, but you have one of those voices for a talk that no matter what you were saying, I think it's transcending. And I have to tell you, you've made me jealous. I don't have such a talk. I'm totally envious of you. Thank you. But let us open the floor right now if anyone has a question. We also have some folks who are in Asia and elsewhere who could not be here today and already sent me some questions. But if you have a question, we have some folks watching on YouTube as well. And write to me at jundotreeleaf@gmail.com, and I'll be able to ask a question for you too. But anyone present here has a question, please just raise your hand.
Excuse me.
Koku, yes?
Thank you for your talk, Ayya Dhammadīpā. It's a story I really like in Zen tradition as well, but you've kind of unfolded a bit more for me there. I'm just down the road from you at the minute in Canterbury, so it's nice to be
lovely.
in London. I hope London is taking good care of you.
It is indeed, thank you.
That's good. my question is, was there a reason you picked talking about envy? Is that something you've had an experience of, or you've seen it play out somewhere? I was just wondering why you picked that subject.
It's a good question. Thank you. I picked that subject because when I thought about the topic, so we were given the topic, I think it was by Edo Carney, but I can't recall right now, who was the one who said the topic for the title for the book, Zen Teachings in Challenging Times. And I thought about what is it that makes this challenging times? And I think that envy, this way of non-acceptance of what's happened, this way of a less than constructive response to certain events, to certain people's abilities or inabilities. You know, there's so much of this in the public discourse. I think I wrote a little bit about that in the chapter, that what I see oftentimes is in the public discourse, very harmful states, very deeply painful states like envy or like various other kinds of dukkha are actually celebrated or held up as being positive, rather than really observing them for what they are. So that was why I chose it, because I think that is something that's quite prevalent in the public discourse these days, and something that in fact makes times more challenging than they need to be.
Anyone in addition?
Sekkei?
I want to say Sekkei and Koku are two of our priests at Treeleaf. I'm sorry to call on them first, but Sekkei, please.
Thank you. I was chatting with a couple of Dharma friends this morning about you coming, and a few of us had sort of reread your chapter in the last couple days, and one of the things that we sort of universally in the group were struck by is that there's sort of envy and guilt are like these on the teeter-totter. They're like the same but opposite. And how much, and guilt's not quite the right word, but there's a feeling of a sort of reverse envy, that those of us who live in a relatively stable environment, with maybe good health, and we look out into the world and we see all this suffering, right? And we look at our position, we're like in this like Ashura realm, right? With nice homes, and we don't have to worry about lack in terms of food, or maybe medicine. And there's this feeling that arises that's like this anti-envy, right? It's this like, what do I do? Like, how do I help all of those who are lacking? There's no lack here. And I feel like to a certain extent, like the longer you practice, and the more, maybe not the longer you practice, but practice tends to water the seeds of this is what's arising right now, and I'm kind of cool with it. I don't need a drink. I don't need an escape. I'm just going to be with what arises right now. And you want to help others either with their actual lack or to help them be comfortable with it. And I don't know, I guess I don't want to say too much about it, but I just feel like there's this like envy and anti-envy, and they're two different sicknesses that maybe dance around each other. If you had any reflection on that.
Well, what's arising in response to your reflection there is the fourth of the Bodhisattva's methods. So, we have Bodhisattva Shishogo, the Bodhisattva's 4 methods of working with others, practicing with others. And the fourth of them is this practice usually often translated as identity action, or it means something like enabling people to see themselves as also bodhisattvas, and not in the sense of, that might sound initially as something dogmatic, as in like we're trying to convert people, but it's actually more like this, coming back to Wei Nang's teaching, enabling people to see themselves as complete, that they are also fully complete Dhammas with a full capability of response that we also have. So that way then starts to erode both the envy side of things, like, oh, I need this or that to feel like a special person, or the guilt side of things of, I'm not good enough, or I'm okay and they're not okay, and therefore I should feel bad about being okay, or right, that it starts to basically erode this tendency that we have toward a hierarchical view of others. And that's incredibly important when we are on the bodhisattva path, that we don't set ourselves up to be the one, the heroes that are making it possible for everybody else, but rather that we're helping ourselves and others to see that, just as I was saying, the full Dhamma is accessible right here in you, in them, right? So on a practical level, we do need to act. We do actually need to do skillful things in the world. And this is the problem that gets set up by the polemic and the Platform Sutra. So the Platform Sutra sort of pits that idea of doing anything against the idea of emptiness. But the fact is that emptiness is demonstrating the subjective reality. Those two are not even two sides of the coin. They are this, right? This full expression that is the thing. This subjective world is not any less the full Dhamma. So if that's the case, that means that we also need to act in very specific ways, right? To bring as much skillfulness into the world, as much mitigation of suffering into the world as we possibly can. That's what the precepts are about. The precepts are saying, hey, this is how karma works. Karma works that when you do stuff like this, the tendency will be towards some negative outcomes. When you do stuff like that, the tendency will be towards some positive outcomes. That is true also. Subjectively, there is difference, and we need to acknowledge that. So hopefully that helps.
If I may ask a question for one of the folks who wrote from home, one of our members asked to be anonymous. I will summarize. Our Sangha specializes in many people who have health issues, and this is one of our members. And she writes that she encountered an accident and lost her health. She's now disabled because of the accident, and she is envious of herself, who she was, and what her life was before she encountered this. Now she's basically homebound. How do you advise her to deal with this kind of jealousy or envy?
So I would start with acknowledging the dukkha of that. We would start with acknowledging that painful feeling that maybe grief that is present there, some feeling of loss of what you had before or what you thought you had before. So that's one place to start, is to really acknowledge and attend to that feeling of grief, of loss, of there having been something. And then there is looking at the potential that's here in this moment, looking at what is the possibilities now, you know? Yeah, there is only you can know what it is that would be fulfilling at this point, but you can do something that is fulfilling at this point in your life. And I would say if you open your mind and heart to the capacities that you have, then you might see something that you haven't seen yet as some possibility that would open up, that would blossom for you. But it's not going to look like what you thought it was going to look like. And that is the key part, to really acknowledge that letting go, sometimes letting go of our dreams or our ideas or our plan, something that we held dear, letting that having to acknowledge that the future will not look like what we imagined it to be like, can be the hardest part, actually. But that was always true. So that's why we're asked to do that. Not because of a sense of a lack of compassion, but rather an acknowledgement that an acknowledgement that the unfolding of this life is pretty miraculous at all times.
Thank you. Another question from one of our folks here.
Please. Yeah.
Wave big so I can see. Did I see you, Kote? You had a question? All right. Then I'll ask one for myself, if I may, that I'm fascinated by. I think it's rather obvious that you would be in a unique position to answer it. You're walking what some people would say two paths that sometimes through the centuries have had a little bit of, shall we say, people have found differences between the two paths, and you have found a harmony there very obviously. So may I ask you about walking the two paths, and especially what brought you to it, but also there are differences, and do you find the differences between, and how do you handle the differences between our Zen Mahayana path and the Theravādan path you're walking, Dhammadīpā?
Okay, well, Um, so if the meaning of the Bodhisattva path is to practice for the benefit of all beings, I have to say, I've yet to find anybody who's not practicing for the benefit of all beings. No matter what color robes they had on. They may struggle with that at different times. But this idea that the Theravāda path is not a Bodhisattva path is up for discussion. The Buddha himself referred to himself as the Bodhisattva before he was the Buddha. So to be an awakening being for the benefit of all beings, well, yes, of course, that is the thing to do. That is the thing to do. And we see that described in various ways in the early Buddhist suttas and the Pali suttas, and we see it described in other ways in the Mahayana sutras. And so what I have found personally is that there are very specific forms of practice that are described in early Buddhism that are very helpful to me personally. So, for example, I started practicing metta a long time ago in 2005. Why? Because I had just recently moved into San Francisco Zen Center, to the city center there. And I realized I went to Shosan Victoria Austin for practice discussion. She wouldn't let us call it Doksan with her because she wasn't the abbot at the time. And she said, and I said, you know what, Shosan? I wake up furious every single day. Absolutely furious. And it doesn't have to do with the wake-up bell or with what I dreamed or with what my chores are that day or with the fact of being in the temple or what I ate for dinner or anything else. It doesn't have anything to do with any of that. It's just this anger that I'm carrying around with me. And she said, oh, you know, I think you could stand to do some metta. And so she gave me some verses to recite. And I think that Shosan actually thought of this as like, okay, this is a practice that I might do for a little while and see if that was a help. But I've been doing metta every day now, more like 3 times a day since then, because I have found that practice of returning again and again to an intention toward myself and toward all beings totally fits with my Bodhisattva path. And in fact, is the way of establishing that in the mind. That way of reciting metta, of the metta meditations. There's a metta meditation called radiating metta, where you experience, I experience, we experience this incredibly vast, limitless, bright, joyful mind. So that's one example. And I could name many, many other examples, but the specific types of practices that are described in the suttas, in the Pali suttas, are tremendously helpful. They have literally changed my mind. They have literally clarified my mind for me. I understand my mind better now than ever before because of those Pali suttas. And I know that Zen has many teachings that are good for the beginning part of the path. A lot of very good teachings, particularly I would say around embodiment of the path. And Zen has very good teachings describing the end of the path or the the realization of the path. And then there's this big, what I would call this big middle section in here, right? And this big middle section, Dogen wanted to emphasize our capacity in any moment to touch into nirvana. That's what the Heart Sutra is about, for example, right? It says, I take this quite literally. When you understand no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, then there is no fear. When there is no fear, then one realizes nirvana. I take that quite literally. So if you want to talk about how to realize nirvana, then great. How is it to experience, to realize those things? So the suttas will tell you step by step. And when I have had time and time again the experience of reading the sutta, and the Buddha says, this step happens, and this step happens, and this step happens, and there are 12 steps that he lays out. And I've seen the first 5 in that order, in my own mind, in my own practice, then I have total confidence in the next 7 of them. No question. Absolutely no question. So for me, it has been, and this is what I was trying to say earlier, kind of more poetically, for me, there is this very clear way in which the practices of early Buddhism meet the specifics of this karmic constellation in a way that is helpful for me to realize my bodhisattva path and my bodhisattva intention. So now the differences, I would say there are some differences, and the key difference that I want to point out is what happens after awakening. We can talk about to what degree the practices are included or not included and so on up to that point. But the question is what happens after realization, right? So you have many people within the Mahayana schools who have taken up this idea that after realization, the bodhisattva just chooses to keep coming back again and again and again and again and again. Right? And yet you have to ask yourself whether that's possible, whether there is any personal intention which can transcend karma, because that's what's happening at the point of realization. What's happening is the resolution of the karma of delusion, and the karma of delusion is what brings forth the next life. So you have to ask yourself, is it really possible to override that? Is a question. Some people would say yes, some people would say no, some people would say, I have no idea. Me, I say, I will realize the Dhamma and see what happens. I will see exactly what happens. Right? Because as my teacher would say, you don't wait to wake up. There is no waiting to wake up. Wake up right now. Right now. Huh? Anybody who tells you to put off your enlightenment, I would say run as fast as possible in the opposite direction. So it's not 2 paths. It's not 2 paths. It is simply an acknowledgement that there is the subjective reality of this karmic constellation, and there are many teachings that are specifically for that purpose. First this, then that, then this, then that. Try this meditation, try that meditation. There's a whole toolbox. And there is this overarching understanding or this overarching perspective of the complete interdependence of all things. So of course, when this one wakes up, all beings wake up. So I am all out on the path of waking up. That's the most that can be said. Now, Most people want to know what color your robes you're wearing, or this or that, who ordained you, this and that. And so I usually say to them, I'm a dual lineage teacher. I'm a dual lineage teacher, and I'm committed to the bodhisattva vow. And if you were to ask me, what's my day-to-day practice? I get up, I practice metta immediately. Before I go to sleep every night, I practice metta. Always, every single day. When I teach meditation, I generally don't teach Zazen. I generally teach guided meditations from the early suttas, because those are the ones that have been most informative for me. And I wouldn't say most informative. Let me put it this way. I've also experienced the tremendous benefit from Zazen, from Shikantaza specifically, and from the Koan tradition and all of those things. That's why I'm here talking to you about that. I wouldn't set it down for the world. Many people have said to me, it's quite funny when people in the Theravāda world say to me, oh, you're so Zen. And I say, well, I've been practicing Zen for 36 years now, so you couldn't beat it out of me.
Thank you. I hope it's all right if we keep you a few more minutes, unless you need to rush off.
A few more minutes. It's getting a bit late my time. So yeah, I would say 10 or 15 more minutes, and then we can call it a wrap. I would like to offer dedication of merit at the end, if you don't mind.
We've had a question from someone I don't know, named, I believe it's Lisa, who, if I may summarize, because I don't have my glasses, had practiced in Thailand and was once interested in ordaining, but was told in Thailand there are no female bhikkhuni now, and wonders how you became a bhikkhuni, and have you met any resistance to that in traditional circles? I believe that's her question.
Yeah, so it's unfortunate when people say things like that, that there are no bhikkhunis, because there are. For one thing, all of the Korean Chan tradition, the Chinese Chan tradition, women would be quite offended, right? Most of Zen in the rest of the world outside of Japan is ordained in the Vinaya. They are bhikkhunis as well as being Zen practitioners. Japan is unique in that way, that it's not following Vinaya. That said, in the Theravāda side, and so Thailand, there were never, up until about 30 years ago or so, bhikkhunis, because the women's lineages were not permitted. It was actually illegal in Thailand for many years. So there has been a tremendous resistance to women's practice in every tradition I've ever heard, in various forms, at various times, in various countries. And it's not just true of Buddhism, it's true throughout. Women experience a lot of misogyny, patriarchy, discrimination. Even in my master's temple, despite the fact that my master is quite progressive, even in my master's temple, I experienced some difficulties in Zen. And to put it briefly, to become a bhikkhuni, you need, in the Theravāda, you need to find some Theravāda bhikkhunis, and there are some. There are I hear about 5,000 or so of them in Sri Lanka these days. Sri Lanka is experiencing a tremendous resurgence. There are probably 500 to 1,000 or so of them in Thailand. You should look up Venerable Dhammananda in Bangkok. So you need to find yourself about a handful. It takes about 5 of them, bhikkhunis, and 5 monks. So the way that it's understood these days is that the bhikkhuni tradition in the early Buddhist side of things, the early Buddhist lineages, requires a dual ordination, a minimum of 5 bhikkhunis and a minimum of 5 bhikkhus. And I have to express my profound gratitude to the Sri Lankan bhikkhus in the United States. They have literally made it possible. If it were not for them, not the Western monks, not American monks, not Canadian monks, no, the Sri Lankan monks are the ones who have made it possible for Western women to become bhikkhunis in the early Theravāda. So you need to find some bhikkhunis, and you can practice. There's a couple of very good monasteries in California. There's a very nice monastery up in New Jersey, which is actually both bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. And you can be ordained, or go to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, they love bhikkhunis over there. That's great. But yes, Thailand, wow, probably the most difficult of all places. Well, no, I would say Myanmar/Burma, the most difficult of all places to become a nun in early Buddhism, and Thailand would be a close second to that.
Lovely. Well, we're going to let Dhammadipa go on her way soon, so I'm just going to ask the people here, any last question? This is your chance. Bjorn?
I'm really sorry to keep you. Well, we've had a question from someone watching on YouTube, and they've been waiting for like 15 minutes. So I really want to, put it out there. If you feel like answering it, it is up to you. But they say grief is like living two lives. When you pretend that everything is okay, and then the other one where your heart silently screams in pain. So how do you live with grief? And how do you find the real you? That is the question they had for you. Thank you.
Yes. So grief has its own timeline, as you know, this person who's writing. Grief has its own way of working itself out. And that can be one of the hardest parts, this not knowing what is the timeline, what is the path for the resolution, or not the resolution perhaps, but the care for the grief. So one way to think about how to work with grief is to understand that it happens because of love, because of care, because we had care or love or some kind of real compassion. And then there is a loss. It could be for ourselves, it could be for some situation, it could be for a person that we've lost. But grief is truly driven by the care. So one thing that you can do in terms of when you feel the pain is to remind yourself to see if you can step back into the care that is driving that. Where is the love? Find the love that goes with that and remember the love. That's one of the most important things, because when there is a loss, the love doesn't have to be lost. In fact, it's not. That's why there is the pain. So keep going back to the love and the care that is driving the grief, rather than letting the pain of the grief be the thing that you go back to again and again. If you can, try to remember that part. And know that because of that, grief becomes something which eases when we learn how to experience the fullness of this life, even with that thing or that person or that dream missing. So that's a tall order. And again, it takes time. You have to reimagine, how is it to be this thing, to be this one without that? And that takes time. Oftentimes it takes a lot of self-understanding and a lot of patience, kind of work through putting all the pieces of the puzzle back together again, knowing that there's going to be that one piece missing, but there's still the possibility of fullness. So I just wanted to also say one last thing about the response to grief, which is be kind to yourself. Be really kind to yourself when you're grieving. Take care. And I mean that in quite literal ways, like do things that will comfort you physically and emotionally, because that will help. That will help you to feel that you can live with what's going on.
Thank you so much, Aya Dhammadīpā, for your time. And you said that you would like to share some verses with us. And thank you so much.
Yes. So I would like to dedicate the merits of our practice today to the well-being of all beings. May all beings be free from mental suffering. May all beings be free from physical suffering. May all beings realize wisdom right here, right now. Wisdom of knowing the truths of our lives. And special support for any beings you might be holding in your hearts right now. May they know your compassion for them. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba buddha nubhavena sada soti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba dhamma nubhavena sada soti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba sanghanu bhavena sada soti bhavantu te. May you have every good blessing. May all the devas protect you, and by the power of all the Buddhas, all the Dhamma, and all the Sangha, may you always be well.
Thank you, Konin Cardenas, Reverend Konin Cardenas, Aya Dhammadīpā. That's a mouthful. And thank you all who gathered here today. And also thank you for the people who are going to be joining us with the recording, probably more than are here today in the coming days and weeks. You're here with us as well. Thank you to all, and peace to you. And thank you for being a friend and Dhammadīpā and sharing with us today.
Thank you for the warm welcome, Junda, for having me. And thank you to everyone, yes, for coming and practicing together. It is always a treat for me to see you taking care of your lives in this way. So be well. Good night or good morning.
Good afternoon to everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you.